Welcome to the Legal Insurrection podcast. We have your updates for the week of August 26th in this episode. My name is Kemberlee, Kaye, and I'm the Operations and Editorial Director with the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and I'm here with our president and founder, Professor Jacobson. So let's just jump on in. We have quite a few things to cover this week, as we do every week. But let's start with Trump's transition team. I think it's coming together in ways that I didn't quite expect. I figured that he would draw in a couple of people that are not necessarily your traditional party line towers, and it looks like he's doing exactly that. Because he's given Tulsi, Gabbard, and RFK spots on his transition team. Pretty significant spots at that, covering issues that I think there's quite a few people that care about, like we discussed last week. What do you think of that move on his part?
Well, I think including them on the transition team is a way of, signaling that he's serious about including them in some manner in his administration. That this is not all just a one-off, campaign press conference sort of thing. But I think the significance is really beyond the transition team. It's the fact that RFK seems pretty devoted towards energizing his supporters, which may only be 3 or 4% of the electorate, but that could be huge. And Tulsi Gabbard, similarly, former Democrat, although I think she's, been somewhat, hostile to the Democrats for a long time. So I think it's significant. I think it's a little too early to tell what the impact will be on the polling, but at least the initial signs that I'm seeing is that the polling is almost a statistical dead heat right now, which is why I think the RFK Tulsi wing of the electorate, be it 2 to 3 to 4%, is huge. And I think that the polling will clarify more, but at least from what I'm gathering, this was a good move for the Trump team.
Well, I think too, it indicates his willingness to work with, what is the word? I apologize, y'all. If you're listening, I'm super allergied up this morning. But I think he's willing to work with non-traditional factions of the party, because like we've talked about before, he's not a traditional politician in the sense that we're used to, that he comes out with his talking points and, he's going to do Democrats this, Republicans that. He seems to be far more inclusive. We saw that when he ran in 2016, especially the draw that he had. There was a massive crossover. We covered this. We wrote about this quite extensively on the blog, between Bernie supporters and Trump supporters. They were both drawing in people from outside the typical political realm in different ways, people that usually weren't engaged in politics. And so I think this is, to me, I think there's that additional layer to it as well, that he's willing to work with people across the aisle, people who are Democrats, tried and true Democrats. And so I think it's a very interesting move. I think it's an important one. I think it's also very strategically smart. And then we have Harris, who will be joining CNN for a pre-taped interview tonight. We're recording Thursday morning. And shocking no one, it's going to be pre-taped. Of course, she's not going to be speaking off the cuff. Everything will be scripted. She'll be with a friendly media outlet. I think she could probably only get friendlier if she were to be on MSNBC. But I don't know. It seems like the public is starting to become at least a little bit aware of the fact that this is kind of a sham campaign. We're not getting any sense of who these people actually are. Do you think that doing something like this in a setting where it's going to be super scripted is a non-event? Do you think it will help her? Do you think it will hurt her? I realize we're kind of speculating here because it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, well, I think there's a few big takeaways from this. One is there's a little bit of a meme on Twitter, X, that a lot of people post all the time, which is, you don't hate the media enough. Okay, so that's what whenever the media does something, you don't hate the media enough. And this is another example. Why is CNN pre-taping this? Why aren't they doing
Right.
it live? Why did they capitulate? Because what's going to happen is it's going to be taped. I assume at some point late this afternoon, it's going to be aired tonight at 9 p.m. And that gives the Harris campaign and their friendly media several hours to spin the interview. So we're going to have several hours of hearing from the Harris campaign, but also through media friendly to the Harris campaign, based on what the Harris campaign is telling them, telling us how great she did and how this proves how presidential she is and how this is a game changer for her. So CNN's despicable, beyond despicable for doing it this way, because this is the first interview with her the entire election season, and they're doing it in a way that is going to be allow her to spin it. So that's number one. This is shameful. Number two is she's bringing walls with her. How embarrassing for American women that the woman who's going to break the ultimate glass ceiling can't do it on her own, has to bring daddy with her to the interview as her emotional support vice president. And of course, the Harris campaign supporters are spinning. Well, look, John McCain had an interview with Sarah Palin. Well, yeah, after he'd done 300 interviews on his own. But this is her first one since she was designated, anointed the nominee. So this is a total embarrassment. It is, and this is not an original point. I've seen others make it. It also cuts down the amount of time she's got to talk because
Yes.
it's an hour-long interview. Part of it's going to be the questions. Then he's going to get to talk, and she's taking the time allotted to this interview and cutting it almost in half. Third issue is going to be very interesting to see if Dana Bash, the CNN person doing the interview, is tough on her or not, or is this going to be an Oprah-like interview? Because there is a target-rich environment of her flip-flopping, changing positions. She's now come out in favor of the wall. She's on video many times saying it's a vanity project and she's not going to vote to fund it. So, I mean, is she really going to hold, her to the fire? And last point, okay, you can tell I'm agitated about this. Last point is Dana Bash going to pull a Kamala? And when Walz tries to butt in and tries to dominate, which he probably will, is she going to say, I'm talking, excuse me, I'm speaking right now? Is that what Bash is going to do? Because I think Walz is there to help her out. Walz is there to patch up any mistakes she makes. So I think it's going to be very interesting how she deals with the fact that Walz, who's a complete clown, I mean, his entire life story pretty much has been debunked. Is she going to allow him to dominate the conversation and act as a support? So, maybe I'll be proven wrong. Maybe CNN will do a stand-up job. Maybe they will do the sort of job they would do with Donald Trump in an interview, which is haranguing and harassing and not letting him get away with anything. But I'm not confident.
I mean, I don't think the campaign would have agreed to something like this if they weren't 100% certain they could control most of it. I just don't see that happening as tight as they've been, as controlling as they've been, I mean, truly it is well managed to be able to keep the lid on things to the extent that they have, which, like we've discussed, is a lot easier when you have the media in your back pocket, front pocket, wherever. I mean, like you own them, and they'll do your bidding. So I mean, I love the point you made, and I think it's 100% true. I don't. You have a woman candidate in here, and then you have the patriarchy who has to sit there and babysit her because Walz can speak off the cuff far better than she can, And I think it'll be very interesting to see if he's going to end up mansplaining things that she cackles her way through or,
I,
stumbles over.
I hope they have a photo or an image that drops back slightly so that you can
Hmm.
see how he's sitting. I wonder if he's going to sit like women complain men sit on the subway.
Manspreading. That's what
Man
they call
spreading.
it. That would be that. I mean, that would just be perfect. But I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see. But I think we pretty much know exactly what this show is going to look like, and but I think
And
it
let's
is
remember,
very, very.
CNN was the one who leaked the questions to the
Mm-hmm,
Hillary campaign in advance
mm-hmm.
of the CNN debate in 2016.
Leaked, right?
Yeah, it
um,
fed Hillary knew the questions that were coming.
so ridiculous, so ridiculous. We do not have a serious media. If y'all haven't watched Anchorman 2, to digress for just a moment, this is important. Um, it is one of the best depictions of the creation of cable news media. Um, it's absolutely hilarious and how they turned it into entertainment, and it's a complete parody on the creation of cable news. It was really, they said it at the time that cable was coming, and they address many of these things that we complain about now, how this is not news, this is entertainment. Much of this is scripted, but anyway, I just thought of that. It is ridiculous, but it is hilarious, and if you're into that thing, worth a watch at some point in life. Um, so, as you were saying, she was, we know we've talked about this a lot too, that she's flip flopped on the wall. She was for EV mandates, now she's against them. She basically, ripped Trump's tax on tips off completely when she was speaking in Las Vegas just to appeal to the crowd there. I mean, she so early into her campaign is one of the worst, most blatant flip floppers that we've seen in a very long time. I mean, and especially because there's video evidence of all of this, and she tries to act like none of these things were, or that she was not part of any of these policies. She's literally the vice president in the administration that is doing these things, or not doing these things when it comes to the wall. And so I don't know. I don't know how she keeps this up, but I know that, Vance had even made a joke that at this point she may as well put on a red tie and talk about how she's going to make America great again. And I know we've discussed this, but how does this hold up for her in the long run if she continues to flip flop this way? And she's just every week it seems like she's adopting pieces of Trump's policy platform or things that Trump would like to do or change that her administration or the administration that she's part of has initiated.
Yeah, I mean the wall. You know what they would do with Donald Trump if it were reversed. They would start the question on the interview by playing the tape of him contradicting himself.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
and then they say, "Why have you changed? Why should Americans believe you now and not then?" Is she going to do that? I mean, that's what they would do to Trump. That's what they would do to any Republican candidate. So it's going to be very interesting whether they go after her the way they would go after Donald Trump. I am not hopeful. I think that she's capable of it. Dana Bash is certainly capable of it. She's done it to others, but I think that this whole thing is prearranged. So maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised and it will be a real interview. Uh, but I'd be shocked if that happens.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath. I'm not holding my breath. So one of the things that we haven't talked about in a few weeks, and I think we'll just do a quick rundown of these. For those listening, we're a little pressed for time this morning, but I want to touch on updates on the Trump cases. Um, those were hot and heavy in the news about a month ago, but now we have some September dates popping up. And so let's start with the federal election fraud case, which I think has a hearing Tuesday, September 5th.
Yeah, I'm not sure of what the date is, but I think the judge has scheduled something. I don't know if that will proceed the way it was intended because of the refiling of a new indictment. So I'm not really sure where things stand in terms of the court in the election fraud case, the DC case,
Right.
whether the Jack Smith case, whether something's going to happen next week or not. But the big news is that he refiled the indictment. I say refiled. Technically, it was a grand jury re-indicted, but we know that that's a joke. So they didn't make huge changes. The Supreme Court had cast a lot of his case against Trump in doubt because of presidential immunity. So what he did is he reframed it to try to get around the presidential immunity problem. And so at some point, the judge is going to have to deal with that. But given that the reindictment just came down, I'd be surprised if she dealt with it next week. My guess is if there is a conference for next week, it would be more of a scheduling conference as to what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And so I assume there will be challenges to the new indictment, and it just kind of kicks things off again. So, but that's the big thing is you know, the week before early voting starts in some states, Jack Smith brings a new indictment. The DOJ has a policy of not taking major steps in cases involving a candidate within 60 days of the election. So, he's a very tricky guy. Oh, it's more than 60 days from election day. Yeah, but voting is starting in a week in some places, which is a different issue. That's completely ridiculous that people are voting 2 months before the election, but that's a
Sure.
different issue. So this is DOJ. This is Jack Smith trying to interfere. I think there's no question about it, and it's really despicable. It's dominated the headlines. It's now going to be back in the headlines. It's what the Democrats wanted, and it just casts even more doubt on the legitimacy of the entire federal and to some extent state attempt to get Trump. It also feeds into very nicely the point RFK was making, is that Democrats have so corrupted the legal system that their main means of ensuring their power is lawfare, whether it's lawfare from private parties, whether it's lawfare to get someone kicked off a ballot, whether it's to try to criminalize politics. So this really feeds into the RFK theme, but it also is what the Democrats wanted. They want the election to be about the criminal cases.
No, exactly. And so far, that hasn't gone their way. I hope it continues that way. Next is the hush money payments. Where sentencing was rescheduled, and I think that one's coming up sometime mid-September.
Yeah, I think next week the judge, I think September 6th, and that might be the date you've been thinking of for the other case. I think September 6th, the judge in New York State Court in the hush money case, the ridiculous hush money case, is
Yes.
going to rule on whether the Supreme Court's immunity ruling um, requires vacating the jury verdict. Contrary to what people have said, Trump has not been convicted. Okay, he's been found guilty by a jury, but it doesn't become a conviction until the judge enters the judgment of conviction, and that's what's being contested now. So, contrary to what you hear, he is not a convicted criminal in that case. And so the question is, what is the judge going to do? Because there seems to be evidence of Trump conduct that at least falls within the scope of the immunity. And if that was introduced at the trial, then it calls into question the jury verdict. So that's what we're going to hear first. The judge, when he scheduled that hearing, had a very interesting clause or sentence in his uh, order scheduling September 6th, which is that he'll rule on the immunity on September 6th and sentencing will be September 18th if necessary. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people picked up on that. So I'm not at all convinced in a fair, reasonable, logical world that this jury verdict would survive the immunity ruling, and certainly, but I don't think anything that's happened so far in New York State cases, whether it's the civil case or this one, has the appearance of being fair. Whether it's fair or not is a different question, but it doesn't have the appearance of being fair. And so that's what's going to happen. It is conceivable that by September 18th, you will have a presidential candidate who's going to get sentenced. And the question would be, what would the sentence be? Would it be stayed pending appeal? Are they going to haul Trump away to court? I mean, to jail on September 18th? I think if they did, his poll numbers would go through the roof, because that would certainly be vacated or put on hold by an appeals court. Okay. So I don't think anyone's really expecting that, but can you imagine if, in a New York State case where the judge's daughter does consulting work for the Harris campaign. Okay, the judge's daughter gets millions of dollars, or at least big money, for consulting with the Harris campaign. That judge is going to sentence Harris's opponent in a presidential race to prison. I mean, really, that would just be unbelievable. And I think, it would feed into the narrative that they can't win it fairly and squarely. They're manipulating everything. They're moving candidates around at will. They deprived the 14 million people who voted for Biden of having him on the ticket. They anointed Harris without so much as a single vote being cast. That this feeds into what RFK, and I think it's something that transcends the parties. I think a lot of people in the country are getting an understanding, if they don't have it yet, how deeply corrupt the Democratic Party manipulation of everything has become, and lawfare has become. I mean, the lawfare is so ridiculous that when RFK was running for president, they tried to kick him off the ballot in all these states. Once he announces he's not going to continue his campaign, he's going to suspend it, and wants to get off the ballot in swing states, now they're suing to keep him on the ballot. Okay, so when it helped them, they wanted him off the ballot. Now that they think it'll help them to keep it on it, they want him on the ballot. That's how manipulative everything is. It's really distressing. It's really disheartening. And I think it will, if this judge sentences Trump to prison, it will crystallize things, and it will motivate Republican voters more than anything. Remember, this is going to be a tight election no matter what. And turnout and motivation is going to be key. And if I were Trump, and recognizing I'll probably never spend a day in prison, I think in terms of my campaign, the one thing I would probably want more than anything is for this judge to do something stupid like sentencing him to prison.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And the last one is the Mar-a-Lago classified documents.
Yeah, that case is gone for now.
Yeah.
The judge ruled, and the judge in DC is going to have to rule also, and maybe that's what her hearing coming up is about. I've got to check into that. But the judge in Florida, picking up on a concurring opinion by Justice Thomas in the immunity case, found where he questioned whether Jack Smith was even constitutionally appointed. He picked up on that, and she said, no, he's not, using similar reasoning to what Thomas used. So that case is gone. The case literally does not exist at this moment in time. Now, Smith has filed an appeal. I assume he will follow through with the appeal, but that's going to be months before that's resolved. So that's not going to get resolved before the election. And even if it was resolved in Smith's favor, that simply means the case restarts. It doesn't mean that the case goes to trial the next day. So, Trump is doing pretty well in these criminal cases, but let's not forget that is there any other person in this country who could have survived this government onslaught? There's certainly no other candidate, because nobody has the money that Trump has and the fundraising ability that Trump has to fight these things. Jack Smith and Alvin Bragg and Letitia James would have completely steamrolled and crushed anybody else who stood in their way. And, and I think that's something that people are really beginning to understand. When Trump says, it's you thereafter, I'm just in the way, it's ringing true. It's ringing true. They would have completely crushed anybody else.
Oh, completely. Did you want to say hi? My son's joined us. And of course, he wakes up and immediately grabs a piece of leftover pizza because that's what boys do, apparently.
Oh, hi, Walter.
Yeah, can you say hi? He's waving. Well, thank you so much for your insight, and to those of you who are joining us, thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to like and share with anyone else you think might enjoy this podcast. We hope y'all have a fantastic Labor Day weekend. I know we will. And for more information on this episode, you can go to legalinsurrection.com/8. Everything that we discussed during the show, you can find on legalinsurrection.com. We cover these topics real time daily. So if you're curious about any of the things that we've mentioned, you can definitely find a great repository of information and analysis there. So thanks for listening, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.